You're listening to Conversations with Shonda, a podcast that unpacks the community's grittiest, most vexing problems, hosted by Shonda Smith Baker.
Hello, this is a Conversation with Shonda. This is Shonda Smith Baker. I am excited to be in a conversation with three phenomenal women that are going to be talking about their leadership individually and collectively and what they are doing to really move impact in this city and beyond. I am just going to jump on in and Chastity Lord.
Yes, Shonda.
To meet. Hey, I got to meet you, I think, right before you jumped into this role briefly.
Yes.
I had no idea.
As the carrot. Go ahead and truth tell. They brought you out before I'd even accepted. They were like,
they did, but they didn't tell me for what. But I knew it was
okay.
something. No, they never told me for what.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Very
part.
cryptic, but we did get to meet, and super excited to have you in the leadership ecosystem that touches ground in Minnesota. But you're not from Minnesota.
I am not. Not.
And so I would love it if you would just say a bit about yourself.
I mean, the headline is I have some Minnesota love. I lived in St. Paul when I was probably about 2 or 3 for about a couple of years, but just super nomadic childhood. Born in Texas, lived throughout Oklahoma, Texas area, grew up mostly in Southern California, believe it or not. And as an adult, I've lived everywhere, about a decade in Chicago, DC, New York, Brooklyn, and I'm back in DC. And a little bit about me, ultimately, I'm a manifester. I'm I'm the middle of 3 girls, Beverly Ann's daughter, Willie Mae's granddaughter. And I love to say my grandmother couldn't have dreamed my life because they didn't know anyone like me, but they dreamt as far as they could. And I have taken the baton and gone as far as I can. And I ultimately have been someone that has just benefited from education being such a facilitator of economic mobility. And so if you look at my career, my life, that has really been the key input that has been a part of that. But today I sit before you, as I said, a manifester. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a friend. I'm deeply optimistic, but also, like many of the folks listening, just grappling for how to do more once again when I feel like I don't have enough.
There's a whole sermon in that introduction. But
okay, testify. Be to you.
I'll pause on that. And I'm going to go over to Meredith Moore, who our paths have crossed in different ways over our lifetime. And it is a delight to have you. And I will have you just jump in and do the same.
Well, hello, I'm Meredith Moore. I'm a very proud Minnesotan, so I will stand in the gap, born and raised. And my start in philanthropy came from my mother, who was the first Black woman to chair the W.K. Kellogg Foundation Board. She was one of the first Black women to serve on the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. And so I have just always grown up understanding that we have a service to our community, that you are supposed to use your skills and your talents to support our community. And so I'm very grateful that I was asked 9 years ago to join the National Governing Board of Jeremiah program. And then I've been able to serve, especially in a tumultuous time like this, to stand in the gap of what I think happens very often, in that we have organizations where there's not diversity in the leadership, but there's diversity in the people that we're serving. And so it's been a pleasure to build on all of the skills that I've gained at Howard University and in my corporate career to support Jeremiah and all of the organizations that I get a chance to support, in just being able to share the work that they're doing and the impact it has both directly and indirectly.
Meredith, I have to say, I have a nephew who's in his sophomore year at Howard. And so every time I hear it, I want to say, H-U. I have been truly, and I had to hold myself back from saying.
Yes, I'm a very proud 3rd generation Howard University graduate. So I'm a big proponent. I grew up in a household where education wasn't a question, it was a requirement. Yeah. And so I bring that into everything I do, that my grandfather was a surgeon, Wow. So we've seen what's possible when you have a dream and you have the resources to do everything that God has called you to do. Amen. Hallelujah.
Amen. Hallelujah. And And with that, Lavasha Smith.
Hi, I'm Lavasha. I wear multiple identities. One is being a proud mother. I have a 14-year-old son, but I'm also an aunt to many, many nieces and nephews. I'm from Minnesota. I grew up in North Minneapolis for most of my life until I transitioned to college and done a bunch of different leadership opportunities and roles throughout my professional career. And then I'm currently the program manager at Nexus Community Partners with the Open Road Fund.
And I've crossed paths with you before. And so first of all, we're Northsiders, so I have to acknowledge that because that wouldn't be right if I did not. I think that what is so consistent in the way that Black women tell stories is that we always sort of acknowledge family and legacy and community and how we enter into conversations. I do it as a way to ground, as a way to remind, as a way to find safety. Like, I'm from this community and this community got me, right? Like, it's just a way for me to sort of ground in that, as we move in this work, we got that from somewhere. And so my question here is, what are the lessons? What is a lesson? What was communicated to you that would lead you into a life of contribution in the way that you have led it? Meredith, you look ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, I can share my grandfather, like I mentioned. He was first generation immigrant from Barbados. And he got a scholarship to go to Howard University and study medicine. And he could not get an opportunity to intern at hospitals. And so he created that opportunity, and they created the first place in Los Angeles that birthed most people who were born in LA in the 60s. My grandfather was the person who delivered them. And so he then got onto boards, and he started foundations, and he started to understand the role of leadership. And that was really passed on to us as an expectation that you would get involved with organizations, that if you see a problem, you don't sit and admire the problem, you figure out, how can I change the problem? And so that really, for me, is always the example I go to when things seem like this is too difficult. It can't be more difficult than being a Black man in the 60s. That's right. A pretty tough time. So,
yeah. How about you, Chastity?
It's interesting when I think about contribution, and I love you spoke about, Shonda, how Black women tell stories. Another thing that happens when Black women are telling stories, we were reminded and affirmed through each other's stories as well. And so in this moment, I'm hearing the legacy, this incredible legacy from Meredith, and I am thinking about the legacy that my son's going to be able to tell that's very different than the legacy. And it's also in this that's really beautiful. But when I think about, when I learned about contribution, I really think about when I learned about community, which is really contribution through my vantage point, because I talk about how community is a verb, which is contribution. And I think I learned about the power of community and the role that I play within the community and the community plays for me, just being someone growing up lower income and throughout my childhood. And I was blessed by these incredible angels. I was blessed by the local house of worship, a church up the street that had Vacation Bible School. Now I get that's nothing but a backdoor camp and feeding program for young kids. I learned about the power of that. I learned about making sure that that they were librarians who kind of offered reading programs and things like that for me and my siblings, a middle of three girls, to actually be able to take books home, or learning to play the saxophone. And there was somebody that ensured that there were instruments that we didn't have to rent that I could actually take and leverage. Those are concrete things, but as I get older, I reflect back on the intentionality that must have taken. I reflect back on the grace, the thoughtfulness that a group of people had to kind of pay forward. And I think a lot of times when I think about community or contribution, I think we oftentimes almost see it as like a deficit, or it's like helping someone less than. But, I love to say nobody does anything alone. And even me and my spouse raising a little Black boy, we still are at the grace of people within our community who are helping us kind of make it when these schools are closed every other week, or when, someone's sick, and they're like kind of whatever that is. And so I I think the very essence of how I was raised and my environment was always deeply interconnected, and there was an understanding that there was going to be a collective action around this little girl who was going to ultimately become a woman. And I feel a sense of gratitude that as I get older, I can reflect back on those moments where I didn't see it and think about it with more humility.
Right. Lavasha, I mentioned that we're Northsiders, and, my family has, on my maternal side, we've been here for generations. And I think that, one of the things that I was very aware of growing up and being from here is that the narrative that existed from outside wasn't my experience from inside. And it taught me a lot about who gets to tell the story. And I've had many contributors in my life, but I'm curious on how your family, because you mentioned nieces and nephews and other folks, and you are working to make a difference in many people's lives as well. But what do you think sort of grounded you in the sense of community and thinking about a life that doesn't necessarily just center what you need, but others?
Similar to what Meredith and Chastity has said, I think it started with my mother and my grandmother, just seeing them and how they held themselves. I come from a single mother who came from a single mother who came from a single mother. But we all live within the same community. And my mom was very adamant about education being like a core value and wanting to break generational curses, is what she would say, growing up, and making sure that we don't repeat some of the same things that I repeated, because she was a young mother as well. I remember going to class with her sometimes when she went to college, and I was there when she graduated, like being able to experience those things. But I was always in the community growing up. Like the North Side is very nostalgic to me. It was one of the first jobs I took straight out of college. When I found out I would be working back in the North Side, I'm like, I want this job. Like, this is my community. I know it. You can't tell me, about my community. And so just always remembering to go back and contribute to that, and just being a part of it, even though I don't live there anymore, but always knowing like those are my roots. That's where I come from, and that's my community, and that there's more than one story about that community. And so I think that my mom always making sure that we were grounded in education and have a love for learning and have a love for people is kind of how I also lead as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that. There's a lot of what we're talking about and what you just said that sits in sort of resilience and an ability to see a future that you maybe haven't had an opportunity to touch.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, we're such aspirational people, right? Like the visionary, the creative, and all of those things. And I guess the question here, Chastity, is that did you envision this life that you're leading?
No, I am just getting more comfortable dreaming. If I was candid, in a lot of ways, it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago that I realized that I hadn't really been dreaming. I had been organizing myself and my life in a way of what I didn't want to happen. I didn't want to be a teen mom. I didn't want this. And there was this moment I was like, honey, that's not only is that not going to happen, it can't happen. You are well outpaced that. And so it began where I needed to start to compose and author what I wanted to manifest, what I wanted to create. And that's one of the reasons I use that manifestation language really clearly. But I also know that sometimes it's not around being able to put my finger on the thing that I want to manifest. It's also around a feeling. It's also around a feeling of discomfort around what is happening or what is going on, and being wedded to something different than where I currently am. And for me, that is about Harriet Tubman. Everything goes back to Harriet Tubman for me. But when I think about this woman that wasn't legal, wasn't a human, was someone's property. And for her, in the absence, I love to say, of Glennon Doyle or Deepak or Marianne Williams or anyone, for her to say, I'm not quite sure what's on the other side, but it has got to be better than this. And then for her to organize herself in such a way that she just didn't get her mind there, but she was willing to enlist a group of other, you know how vulnerable that, you know what it's like leading now, trying to enlist and bring a group of people along. And I think this woman did that. And so she didn't just get her mind to a place, but she was willing to try and bring others with. And that's what it ultimately, you talk about your grandfather being Bayesian in the 60s, Meredith. I think about Harriet. And when I get low, for real, I really pull out WWHD. What would Harriet do? She didn't have an extra chromosome. There was no magic dust. She was just willing to bet on herself. And sometimes I say, okay, this is a betting moment, Chastity. Let's bet on yourself. And let's this ain't right. You don't know what the answer is, but you know you're going to stay in motion. And so for me, I didn't know this life was going to be the life, but I did know that I was wedded to being in conversation with my greatness. That I did know. And that is something that I still push. And I talk to my son around. He's like, oh, I know. Be in conversation with your greatness. Like, for real, just like show up, my friend.
Mm-hmm. And Meredith, you have a bit of a story that is interesting because we're from Minnesota. Like interesting and not like the Minnesota interesting, like bad, but like as in like a connection to culture, to history, to legacy, not just in your family, but in the institution that you no doubt learned about in your DNA because you're third generation, as you mentioned. And when I think about even what Chastity said, there's so much that sort of a positive self-identity, an ability to connect to your history, an ability to understand the accomplishments that have happened from the people that you are from, like globally and intimately is super important. And you had a fortunate opportunity to have that. And I would love it if you could just say a little bit on what that meant, because there people are making decisions right now about where they want to send kids to school. And sometimes I don't want to send them far away, and we understand all that. But there is something about being in a place that in HBCU that I did not get to do, but I feel like there's a yearning in my soul for that somewhere. But anyway, what did that mean? What did that do? How did that ground you?
Howard University changed my life.
Mm.
And I knew it would change my life. I was a preschooler when my grandfather got an award, and that was the first time I remember going there. And coming from Minnesota and any community where you're in the minority, I had never seen Black people in every role. I remember that. I remember what that felt like, that the security person was Black, the president was Black, the president's assistant, everybody was Black, and everybody was excellent. Everybody was good at what they did. Everybody had a purpose. And that to me, Minnesota, I was ready to go. I tried to leave junior year. I signed up and got a scholarship. I was like, no, I have done this in Minnesota. For me, Sharon Sales Belton was the reason I stayed in this community. And I just always have to name that. Sharon Sales Belton became the mayor of the city of Minneapolis. And I remember the headline said, Black woman to lead the whitest city in America. And when I went to Howard University, I expanded my dream beyond what I could do in the whitest city in America. I expanded to what I could do just as a woman in the world. And it was just amazing to see the diversity of people, the diversity of their dreams and what they wanted to do and why. And so I am just the biggest proponent to You can go to an HBCU at any point. If you don't do it in undergrad, you can go for graduate, you can do a certificate, but there is nothing that replaces having people who pour into you. Listen, I was terrible at math. Can I just say that? I was so terrible at math. I had done well in school. When I got to Howard was the first time somebody said, you know, if you don't know math, you don't know money. And I was like, hold up, what?
I'm going to need to get to know math.
Yeah. But it was the first time that I had people who really connected it to prosperity, to the things that my family had talked about. Nobody had ever connected education to what was possible in my life. And I know it's because those professors and those teachers had been in places where nobody spoke to them about, here's why this is important. This is why you have to drive this in your life. And I believe that you can do it. You know, I never had anybody at Howard that told me you can't. That's the one thing I always have to say. Howard University has always been a place that said, not only can you do it, we'll show you how to do it.
And these are the same people, right? Like that are coming from these communities where the narrative is not that. And this is just the value of asset-based framing.
Yep.
And speaking to the dreams and not to, for lack of a better word, deficit of how people see where you're from. Lavasha, you have another story, and what you said was, sort of coming from a legacy of women that were single parents and wanting to break generational curses. And I hear that language a lot. Mm-hmm. And that's the language that moves forward. But were you also equally aware of generational strength, resiliency, and wisdom? Like, what was it, a balanced conversation, or did you feel the weight of being the one to move the next generation forward, or was it both?
So what I would say is I definitely felt the weight. There wasn't a lot of conversation, but there was a lot of action, and there was a lot of proof in how my mom moved, in how my grandma moved, my aunts moved, so that I could see better and so that I could see a vision. And my mom made sure I had people around me that could pour into me for the things that maybe she couldn't, or just to compliment. So although maybe the language wasn't there, the proof was in the pudding. Like, she showed me, this is kind of how you do it. I'm the oldest of 5 children. So leadership was like, yep, here you go. You know what I mean? So it's time to lead. But I think now we have more of those conversations and are learning how to have that harmony between the two ideas, and are moving away from, I'm moving away from my story being so told in a negative light, and just accepting the journey and knowing, like, this is my journey and this was supposed to happen when it was supposed to happen, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And that this is a positive thing, and that my son has brought me so much joy, and my family has brought me so much joy, wealth and prosperity in so many different ways, and not just the financial ways, because I grew up in poverty, right? But just the mentality, the love that I have, the wealth for my family that I still have, my mother, things like that. So just moving away from that way of thinking, and then also being mindful too of how I speak to my son and how I speak life into him and the words that I'm saying, and even following up and apologizing when I do say things. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I shouldn't have said that. This is kind of what I should have said. Teaching him the language as well, and trying to unlearn some of the things I learned, as well as learn them myself and then teach them to my son. So
go ahead, Chastity.
So one of the things I want to, I want to be a mirror, because you're being a mirror for me, is that, you talked about not telling your story in such a kind of a deficit light. Is that, one of the things, and, Chandra was talking about leadership. I think we have, as leaders, mm-hmm. and as people who care about the community and the culture, we have to do more truth telling, and we need to tell more of the movie version of our lives versus the trailer version of our lives. Mm-hmm. And I think, everybody wants to talk about falling in love. Nobody wants to talk about what it means to stay in love. Folks want to talk about losing the weight. What does it mean to keep the weight off? And I think I say this, and I don't care who I'm talking to, nobody has it all together. Yeah. Everyone has made many choices that they wish were different. And sometimes some of those errors are just not noisy errors. Some of those errors are just able to be eclipsed with privilege. Mm-hmm. And I think in a lot of ways, when we start to hold that, when I've learned to hold that, I was just like, hey, my stuff is just on Front Street because I didn't have the privilege to kind of cloak it. My son will have cover in a kind of a different way. But this whole idea of we're going to live a life that's void of bad decision making or grief and some of these other missteps is just, it's not realistic, it's not healthy, and it's also it's not anchored in the power of our history, of our lineage. We are people who are resilient. Resilient means you get weathered and you kind of get back up. But I just wanted to share something that I have grappled with, the way that I've reframed that for myself, and as a leader, just being willing to say, "Wow, I really got that one wrong." You guys, I apologize that I said that, as much as, when I'm talking to my spouse or my son.
Lavasha, you were talking about your mother. I was thinking, man, she is me. Like, like the generations before, the story is a little bit different. But, I didn't go straight to college. I had 3 kids. They were in the back of the classroom. And I was negotiating with professors and all of those things to just try to push through the season that I was living in. And I really didn't even know what was on the other side. I just knew I had to, really the goal was to make sure they had food. Yep. Right. Right. Like that was a goal. We need to eat and we need somewhere to sleep. That's the point at this particular moment of my life. And so anyway, the listeners might be wondering, why you 3? Why am I talking to you 3? Are we just talking about, how awesome we are in the work and the lessons? And that is a big piece of it. But the other piece is that you guys are connected. And Chastity, if you would, could you just share how you all are connected in this particular moment?
We are connected through a commitment to an organization called Jeremiah Program that I lovingly call JP, which is a national organization in 9 cities across the country that centers and supports single moms like my mom and Lavasha's mom and Lavasha. Center and support single moms with small kids through a 2-generational model, through a pursuit of economic mobility, with education being the dominant lever. And every year we bring together a group of moms, about 500, for a conversation with who they are and who they're becoming, alum and some of our current moms. And this year's theme is called Collective Dreaming. And if you're wondering what JP is, the headline is most folks in this country that are single parents, especially lower income single parents, they're told to put their head down and bet on their kid. And what JP believes is that we lose a generation that way. And JP is wedded to creating a space where a mom to pick her head up, bet on herself, as you were doing in that classroom with your kids in the back, but also be able to bet on their children, because a JP mom, like all great moms, and a JP mom is a great mom. They dream in 3s. They dream for themselves, they dream for their families, but people forget they are also incredibly wedded to dreaming for their community.
They bet on their children, bet on yourselves, just hit, because there's so many conversations that I hear where they're like, this kid is so smart, or they're so athletic, and, they're going to be the one. And really pivoting from, you are also the one.
We are all the one. We are all the one. It takes a constellation. It really does. It takes a constellation to pull this off. And Meredith, as you were talking about before, is the chair of the National Governing Board of Directors. And so she's bringing that legacy, that commitment, that intuition, that belief in something possible. And Lavasha is an alum of the program. And it's important that when we talk about alum at JP, it's just not a list. We understand economic mobility is a marathon. Heck, I'm still on the marathon as well. And we understand there's a value proposition in staying in conversation with alum to be able to benefit our core programming, but also to be able to foster and support them as they're moving through the different chapters of their life. But more importantly, I know this speaks to you, Chandra, is that we believe in systems change. And longitudinal data and insights. What is Lavasha aware of as she is at a middle class place? What is going on in or North Minneapolis that can provide insight into housing accessibility, insight into workforce development, insight into public education for her 14-year-old son? That conversation is still relevant because she's dreaming in 3s. And how do we actually make sure we keep folks inside the tent because I'll say this one last thing, because I'm passionate about this. I benefited from Pell Grants, and I love to say that if they had actually mobilized and kept in touch with Pell Grant recipients, I would have a lot to say around investing in college and investing in first generation and lower income. But the way we think about direct service in this country, especially around acute need, you engage with it during the time of acute need, never to be talked about again. And what JP is really wedded to is really flipping this thing on its head, where you engage with it during a time of acute need and also as you're moving to agency, because we think there's a value proposition of building a tent, a movement of moms that have this shared identity, this shared experience. It's not about where you went to school, HU, but it's not about what your last name is. It's around a deep desire to reimagine what's possible for their children's future and their future as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we're connected a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you know, what I was thinking about the Dreaming in Three, it requires, and I think you just touched on that in the motto. One is, and I agree, I don't think that we always know how to balance it, particularly at the board governance level, where Meredith, I'm going to have you pop in a little bit on this, is that in order for you to support people dreaming in three, you have to organizationally have strategy that allows people to dream in three and be successful. And the tension between immediate results and systems change. Like they say systems change all day long, but then we start talking about really, you could say, I don't even have a polite word, but
kitchen lines,
I mean, just the tactics. You're like
drives, candles.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
this is like a 6-month tactic. And I think that those are fine things. They're staff things, right? That's staff job. But how do you really hold the organization? Because there's always the immediate need, and many, many people get on the board because they are passionate about an issue, and they become so passionate about the issue that they forget that they're governing an organization and helping to provide strategy and supporting it and making the distance in the long run, right? And so how do you hold that, and what advice do you have for folks that are on boards or want to be on boards in terms of the patient capital that's required and the strategy that is also necessary to understand when and how to respond?
I love that so much. I have served very proudly on the Jeremiah program board for 9 years. When I first joined the board, I had a 1-year-old myself. And so for me, I brought a very realistic perspective about how long it takes for change and how long it takes for solutions to actually have an impact. When I joined the board, we were only in 3 sites, Shonda. We were in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We were talking about Austin. We were talking about Fargo. And a lot of the conversations were about that. How do you expand and do more and still do well at your core services? There was a lot of tension around that. There was a lot of tension about how do you decide where you're going to go once you identify something works in a way that there is fidelity to the model. And what I will say is that my background is in corporate. My background was at McDonald's. And that experience in franchising and putting together systems, but also my experience at 3M Foundation, and how do you explain something as complex as helping single moms contribute to the community, support their families? How do you make that compelling to a corporate funder? How do you deliver results for a foundation that might be interested? And what I will say about my experience on this board, the National Governing Board really has had the opportunity to look at these big issues. We work in partnership with community boards that are, in the different markets. They are the closest to the opportunities and the challenges. And that partnership really has allowed us to center on the moms, in a way that I don't think we would have been able to do if we were just governing from one position. But that inclusion of not only board members, but we've also been able to have some folks that have graduated from the program to be a part of the board. And those insights, I tell you, I have been in the process of talking to board members, and what I have said to them as chair, which I take as a huge responsibility. Chastity can tell you, I mean, I want everybody to see their fingerprints on Jeremiah the way I do. And I see it in Lavasha and her experience. I see it when we do Spark Tank. I see it when we have moms that are focused and have somebody to tell them, this is the job, this is the educational path that you take to get the high paying job. You know, closing those gaps for folks has come a lot of times from board members who've been able to connect the dots, but it's always come from board members that were willing to listen and to learn and to be a student of the work. So that would be my advice for anybody who's interested in serving on a board. If you're not going to be there and really learn more about what's happening, if you're not going to use your voice to advocate for the people who are not seated around the table, you should decline.
Yeah, the other thing that you just said is that it's a huge responsibility. And I think oftentimes people think about the time commitment. And how we start this conversation, it's clear that we all value education. So there is a passion. But ultimately, it's the way that you're talking about it is beyond your personal point of view. That is a filter. That is not your role to bring that forward. And, you know, I believe that boards that work well, the ability, like so many people care about moving the needle to really making a difference. And so that is a key role that can really move it if you're partnering effectively with the executive. So how y'all get along? How do y'all do this? You're smiling on the thing, but I mean, let's talk about the relationship between the executive and the chair and how critical that is to just really get right and to have the muscle to talk through where your disagreements sit.
Well, if I can say, I am very proud to have served on the CEO search committee that resulted in the hiring of Chastity. So I have been invested in her as a leader since the first time I was introduced to her. And I made a commitment as a board member, and I shared that with Chastity when she accepted the position, to make sure that she was successful and to do everything that I could. So even before I was board chair, you know, I've done my best to be available, to share perspectives and insights outside of the meetings, to not make that always be a public thing, but to just be able to share and be available as a mentor, as a support, and as whatever she needs, you know, to just be a bounce before she takes things to the broader board. So that's what I will share about my partnership. And I have to say that that comes from having a phenomenal leader that, you know, without a doubt knows what she's doing, has an incredible vision. And so my responsibility is just to support her in bringing that to fruition. But Chastity can tell you what a dream it is to work with me now.
I would consider it a pleasure. I think one of the things that that I want to highlight that is additive to what you bubbled up, Chandra, and what Meredith already talked about, and you know, Lavasha talked about it regarding her family. Meredith sees her role as board chair as legacy building. She talked about fingerprints, but that's nothing but legacy building. And so when you are engaging with building a legacy around an experience, the way that you show up is very different. The way that you actually think about and lean in is very different. And so that's something that I would kind of put a flag in the sand around if someone is thinking about chairing a board or being a senior leader on a board. Are you interested in building a part of this organization's legacy and what it requires to kind of build legacy? We talked about that. So that's one thing that I will highlight. I would say the second thing is I think it's important for us to truth tell about this moment that we're in. And I'm not just talking about the last month and a half. I would say the last better part of 5 to 6 years. You guys, we were wiping our groceries off about 5 years ago, wiping them off. We were afraid to touch our groceries. To an incredible public display of murder that happened in Minneapolis. Yep. In addition to that, that caused a national conversation while people were afraid to breathe. And then we've had inflation and some real unrest. And now we're at this particular moment. it's hard to forget, but that has only been within a 5-year period. You were talking about a 1-year-old. 1-year-old to 5, I mean, that's a baby. That's not a lot of time. And the thing that I want to speak for my executive leaders, especially folks in direct service, people act like we're selling widgets. I mean, like, I am a human being. I am, in all of my identities, we're all Black women on here kind of engaging. I am living and navigating this as a human, as a spouse, as a mother, as a friend, and simultaneously, I'm having to marinate in it professionally day in and day out. There's no turning off the radio. There's no putting down the paper. I mean, and it's this kind of really kind of intense. And so one of the things I think that is important in this board relationship is to make sure to anchor around the humanity of what the jobs are and what the jobs entail. And it's slightly unhealthy to kind of what has been asked, because it normally wouldn't be in this concentrated period of time. And then the third thing that I will say is something that Meredith has also done a good job about is, executive CEOs need doers, they need donors, and they need door openers. And a lot of board members want to pick one or the other. And I'm here to tell you, you have got to be all three. This is a resource game. I, in my little non-traditional background, has to sit in spaces and places and conversations asking for money day in and day out. And there are many people who are sitting on many of our boards who come from a very different walk of life that could have really incredible touch points to open doors, et cetera. And so you have to you want to do the work, kind of review your packets, engage, be prepared for board meetings, et cetera. But you also have to give money, and whatever that means. But that revolution won't be televised, but it takes money for real. And then you also have to open doors. You got to talk about it. You got to make introductions. You got to be an ambassador. You've got to be a hype person but you need doers, donors, and door openers. Remember the humanity and the uniqueness of the jobs right now, especially direct service. It's not like working at McKinsey. It's not the same thing. And then lastly is creating spaces and places for chairs that are interested in building legacy. And I think that's what makes Meredith so unique in how she's approached it.
Can I add something quick?
Yeah.
I was going to add something that you kind of alluded to already, but I think it's really important to name the fact that you all are also bringing the moms into the conversation and the kids into the conversation and not leaving us out of it. And I think that's a really important part of the work, is to not do the work for the people, but include them in that and to have their voices in that, as well as having a healthy work relationship and having a healthy dynamic. Because if you have riffraff in the boardroom, that shapes the whole program and you see how it's reflected. And so I think those two things are really important, is to make sure that conflict is going to happen, but how do we move past that? And how do we remain positive on the inside so that we can continue to do this work? And how are we uplifting the voices of the people that are directly affected indirectly in our program and continuing to move them forward so they can tell their stories? Because we're doing great things outside of Jeremiah as well, right? We're continuing with our leadership and our education and things like that. And so how are we coming back and tapping into that as well? And I think that's an important part too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the board piece and Chastity, the piece that you meant, because I've been incredibly concerned in a couple of places in the social sector with the number of people that are exiting, particularly Black women.
And I'm trying to give voice to it in the most professional, thoughtful way possible. These are really, really, really unusual.
I heard you. I heard it. I heard it. And one of the top reasons has been board pressure.
Yeah.
Fast results, right? That something doesn't feel right. There's a murder, there's fires, put the fire out, fix crime, do all these things, do it now, fix the disparity, move the needle. It's just like, and what did you do since the last board meeting? And you're like, I'm also trying to raise kids through this. I also, all of these things. And so I think this idea of bringing all of those things that are in your body and having real negotiations around what is realistic and what is not realistic. And are you trying to sustain the leadership or burn them out? And how do you negotiate? I think that's just a whole podcast in itself. You also brought up conflict in the board and how it shows up in programs. And I think that that's also really evident in the work that I'm doing, where people are like, and the board don't even get, they thinking, different than no one's aligned, and all that kind of stuff. So it is just such a critical board. And so Meredith, thank you for that. And talking about it in terms of legacy building, I think is really interesting and a good frame for me to see. And Lavasha, you are in a sense legacy building in a different way, or in a continuation from the strength of the women that you have been birthed from, to contribute into community, both in your work. But I am curious on how you found your way to Jeremiah program, and how did that help meet you where your dreams were sitting?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, education was a value, and similar to Meredith, it wasn't a question. It was like, you're going to college, right? Or you're going to do something, you're going to have a plan. And it was more of thought of like as a way out. So I had education as a goal. I was pursuing my first year of college, and then I became pregnant. Things came to a pause. And there was a lot of feelings and emotions and things that I had to work through, not knowing what to do, kind of losing some friendships, losing relationships, and really just kind of having to sit with like, this is really a life-changing decision. Now, what do I do? And not wanting to become a stigma, not wanting to repeat those same things. And knowing that I wanted to continue my education, and I was pursuing a 4-year, a degree. And so I became to learn about Jeremiah through a family friend. I was about maybe 6 or 7 months pregnant at that time, just trying to figure out my way. Found out about the program, applied, and then went through the empowerment classes. And about halfway through, I moved into Jeremiah when my son was 4 weeks old. So that's kind of how I became to know about it. We went through the program. We had a lot of support during that time from staff, from things like the life skills program. They cooked us dinner twice a week, so we didn't have to do that. They provided the childcare. They provided stability so that I could have an environment to do my homework and not worry about the outside stuff. They provided friendships for my son that he still has today, as well as providing me with positive women, again, and moms in the program to support each other, both in the program and outside. I still have very strong friendships with them today. And then allowing me to be able to complete my degree, see the dream that I wanted, and continue to build on that and the things that I'm doing in my work today.
How did being engaged shape how you saw yourself as a leader?
Knowing that it was possible, knowing that this is something that I wanted to do, and then I could do it because at times I didn't know if I could. At times it became heavy. At times it was like, what do you do? What are the decisions? And I'm the only one making them. I'm not having people to bounce them off of, or, go to and have a family to fall back and say, just come back home. We can take care of you. I didn't have that. Right. So just giving me that space to be able to think about that, being able to be surrounded by other women that had dreams and wanted to do things, and making sure that I stayed engaged not only during the program, but then after, making sure that I'm going back and talking to moms or keeping those, lines of communication open and things like that. So I think those contributed to my leadership, because I think I lead with a lot of humility and intentionality as well. And so just making sure that I remember that my journey, and that's still a part of me, and that still was a part of my story, and then reaching back to people and saying, okay, how can I lift you up, and what is my purpose in this to help move you forward? And so I think that's kind of how I do and how I lead now.
Yeah. And how did it, this is an assumption, shape how you see your son's future?
Yeah. My son was a very happy baby. So he smiled a lot. And so the times where I would get down and the times where I would feel discouraged, I seen a lot of hope. And I knew that I was like, you know what, I have to do it for you. It sounds kind of cliche, like do it for the kids, but it was really like it ignited something in me. And for me to be able to say, you know what, I need to get through this, not only to say I did it, not only to have a better future and to try to not to come out of poverty, but to model for you. This is what it looks like. Your journey may look different, but you can do it despite whatever barriers are in the way. And I want to be that model for you. I don't want to just be a sayer, but I want to do it. And I want you to say, my mom did it. And I've seen how my mom did it. And so those are the things that I think of when I think of like how it shaped my son and he's doing the things. So, I'm very proud mom. He's definitely doing the things and encourages me and says he appreciates me and all of that. So
we just created this legacy award for children of alumni. And what did it mean when you learned about the legacy award, and kind of how did your son react to it?
Yeah, when we learned about the award, I was like, okay, let's read it. Let's understand what we're signing us up for, right? And making him do it. Like, our mom's not writing it for you. I'll write you a letter of reference, but I want you to really think about it. And we got together and wrote down every piece of thing that he might have done. And I'm like, you are a leader in different ways. It doesn't have to mean that I go out and volunteer 5 times a week, but how are you showing up and being positive? By being a good influence on your friends, by making sure that you are encouraging people and being of good character and having values. And how does that show up? So I think learning about it was like, okay, we figured out what it was. We know this, we want to apply for this. And these are the things that you're doing. And how can we like communicate that into applying for the legacy program?
He's a finalist for it, and first, second, and third are going to get donations into their 529 accounts. And so I just think it's that whole legacy. And so it is something that allows Lavasha to keep her story of what JP meant to her family alive for her son, for him to kind of engage with it in pride. So just thank you for allowing me to have my own inquiry moment there, Chandra.
Oh, yeah, no, I love it. And the 529 plan is a plan that allows for families to save for college for their families. And so that is an awesome gift of acknowledgement of leadership to invest in one's future. The question that I had that was in my head is, moving forward, like I always say, there's actors in our life, right? Like racism, classism, sexism, they're actors in our world. But in our individual lives, so is courage, so is confidence. And you could have all the things in the world afforded to you. And if you don't have the confidence to act, you're going to be still. And so what did this do for your confidence? Did you come into it completely confident and you just needed the resources, or did you build something that has allowed you to move with a degree of, y'all can't see me, but shoulders back,
yeah, that came from my mom. But if I'm being honest, like nothing was impossible. Like nothing was impossible. That's what she always told me. And again, Jeremiah just allowed that space to dream it and to be like, okay, this happened. I'm going to provide the space for you to continue to dream and to move forward that dream so that you can take off and do what you need to do for your family and your legacy and continue to build that. So I think that I'm going to definitely give credit to her for that. But during that time, having that support and having that that stability really allowed for me to be like, yep, you're right. And I can do it. And I'm going to do it anyway, despite what anybody is saying and how I'm feeling. I'm going to just do it anyway.
I appreciate that response, because often we think of confidence as something that you don't have and then you have, versus you have it and then you encounter something in life that shakes you. Yeah. And you're trying to figure it out. And so you get a little bit unstable. And so having organizations like Jeremiah programs as a stabilizer in moments that could go left or right, I think are incredibly beneficial to all of us. So as we get ready to close, you said a couple of things. One, were you going to say something? I saw your face.
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
I was thinking about a West Indian phrase when you were talking about the stabilizer. And I was thinking about there's a phrase in Caribbean, they call it, oh, that's your cooler. The person that mellows you out, that keeps you. And so that's what I was thinking. So that's what you saw me.
I saw it.
That's JP's the cooler. Yeah. So that's what I was thinking.
So, obviously this conversation could go on and on, but we can't. And so, but it was really dynamic. There were points of pause for me and certainly clarity. And I imagine that we have sparked some curiosity for folks that are listening that might want to, number one, find out what the heck the legacy board is. We sort of talked about it. I think we understand what it is, but if they wanted to learn more, where would they go? Is it an event?
Jeremiahprogram.org.
Okay.
And there is a drop down, a legacy, and it's for alum of the program and for their children. But if you know any single moms in your life, please, and have them look into jeremiahprogram.org. They can apply themselves and learn more about it, go through an orientation session. And the other thing I'll say, Chandra, you didn't ask me this, as we're also looking for talent right now. And for those of you who are being deeply reflective of this moment, kind of thinking about how you can do more, one of the ways that you might want to do that is in a leadership position. And we do have an executive director role open. And so would love to even just meet you for a virtual coffee. If you're just interested in that, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to engage with you directly about that as well. But I do need just incredible people who are willing to collectively dream with us.
Mm-hmm. In what market?
Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Meredith, is there anything else you would like to say before we conclude this conversation?
I would just say that if somebody is looking for purpose, maybe you're in a career that you're feeling stuck. Maybe you're in a situation where you're not feeling like you are really able to make an impact. Board service can be that thing for you. And for me, it's really been something that has connected me with a community of people that have supported me through various transitions. It's been a place where I've been able to learn, and it's also been a place where I've been able to see my impact in a way that's given me hope in a time that I think there are some people who are feeling a little hopeless. So I hope that if that's something that you have an ability to do, that you would consider finding an organization that deeply aligns with your life and your purpose, and give your time, talent, and hopefully your treasure.
Mm-hmm. All three, Meredith. All three. We talked about
all
that.
Three.
All three. And you better be a doer, a donor, and a door opener.
and can I say, as a group of Black women in Women's History Month, if you identify as a woman and you are sitting in a board seat right now, you have to stand in the gap for empathy for what's happening in this economy and for how we should be empowering people who are in leadership roles. This is not the time to be silent. This is the time to raise your hand and say, pick me. I'm here to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a perfect call to action. And Lavasha, you are going to round us out. I want to give you any opportunity to say anything that you would like to say as we close.
Yeah, just want to all the moms, wherever you are in your journey right now, just keep going. You can live out your dreams. You can live in your prayers, and just making sure that you have that support in that village around you to help see it through, because none of us do it alone. And so that's what I'll leave us with.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, a round of applause for all that you all have done and moved through, right? Despite the weathering, despite all of the things, for us to be able to continue to see the strength in each other is certainly a place that allows for energy to come. And congratulations on a legacy of work and all the ways that you guys are contributing to that. And please run to the website and learn what's happening and what's coming up.
And Chandra, thanks for creating a space for Black women to storytell. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you'd like to explore more content and join our community, find us at conversationswithshonda.com. We have a wonderful collection of episodes featuring notable guests that you can enjoy on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast.